help you identify the role team leaders play in creating a healthy culture. That's number one. What is it that you as a manager or supervisor can do to help create a healthy culture, especially for your team, the people that you are leading directly? Number two, we want to help you think about how you might select team members based on principles that are going to lead toward greater health and vitality for your team. And then from there, we're going to help you think about trust and leadership, management, supervision, and how you go about creating trust. And then the last objective was creating alignment among your team and organization, and what your role in doing that is as a manager or supervisor. So this webinar is really about some big ideas, and actually we're going to frame them as questions. Rather than just here's the idea, think about this, but rather here's the question that you can use to orient your thinking as you go about your daily tasks. This webinar isn't so much about the very tactical, where we might recommend a piece of management software to help you with scheduling or something like that, because frankly, we don't know your organization, and there are many people watching this webinar right now with you. And so instead, we want to give you the principles upon which you can base your processes. So if you're thinking about hiring, you're thinking about your interview questions, well, today we're going to talk about some principles that you can use to help you craft the particular questions that you need for your organization. So a little bit less tactical, a little bit more principle or question-based, but really hoping that as you walk out of here, you actually feel like you've been equipped with some very practical questions and very practical principles that will orient and help you improve in your work. Now, I don't know about you, Wendy, but as you took on your first management role or leadership role, were you on day one fully equipped to be a manager, and you knew everything there was to be a great manager in an organization?
Oh gosh, no.
No, right?
No, and I mean, I think the phrase leaders never arrive, I
Yes.
think is very true. It's a learning process. I think I was equipped in terms of the culture that I walked into. I had you as a very strong mentor that I felt really comfortable asking questions of. But there still is an element of taking theory and ideas and training and implementing them in the context of a larger supportive leadership team.
Yeah, in fact, I've found that management and supervision really is a journey of learning how to be a leader, and that we have this function in our organizations that we like to call managers or supervisors. But really what and those hold a place in an org chart, and we use those terms, but we're also thinking about how we lead people if we're holding one of those spaces on an org chart. Now, for those of you who are watching right now, I'd like you to think back to when you first became a manager or supervisor. Maybe it was very recently, maybe it hasn't happened yet, but probably many of us it has. So for those of you who've been in that role already, ask yourself, if you felt trained and fully equipped to be a manager when you started on your first day, just like I asked Wendy. And I know for myself, my first management role was working with practicum students, and I was in my early 20s. And I was told, yep, your job is to hire practicum students and show them how to mediate. And that was kind of all the job description I got. And I didn't know a whole lot about managing and supervising people. And then a little while later, a few years later, I was hired by an organization to start an office in a new place. And I started, and then we hired the first staff person to work with me, and then another person, and then another person. And all those people reported to me. And I was really good at my job, but I don't know that I was really great at management and supervision, because I wasn't trained to do that part. I was trained to do the role of the organization, but I wasn't really trained to do the role of management supervision. And so I feel like a lot of us do that. We get started and we're good at something, and we get promoted, and then we're asked to manage and supervise without the orientation to what's the most important things to be thinking about as a manager or supervisor, right?
Yeah, Eric, I think that's really true. I mean, being in a supervisory role or a management role, there's kind of two hats that we have to wear. There's the tactical, and then there's all the interpersonal, the relational elements. And it very easily can fall prey to thinking about that tactical, that operational component as being, that's my new job, what I
But that's
gotta
what's got to get
secure.
done too, right? I need to get
Yes.
people to work. I need their shifts organized. I need to do their annual reviews. I need to do, this is tactical. We need to get the work done.
Yes, and we forget that performance is that, making
Yes.
sure those are realized, but there also is the other part that is equally as important to motivate your team, to bring them along, to provide corrective feedback, to readjust as needed,
Right.
and to collectively utilize the strength of that team.
Yeah.
So those are two things that are part of management and supervision, and often we focus on that one bucket, so
tactical.
to speak.
But it's really the other stuff, the principles about motivation and connection and purpose and meaning that actually motivate and engage people and make the other stuff easier. So that's really what we want to talk about today, as those things that make the tactical easier. So let's use the chat for a minute now. I'd like you to think about the roles that you associate with management. So what are the roles you associate with management? You know, is it handholder or I don't know, hirer, or what are the roles that you, when you hear the word management, you're thinking, oh, the role of the manager is, so start writing some of those down into the chat. As you think about managers, what is the role of the manager? And I'm going to ask Wendy, once she starts seeing them pop up in the chat, if she can then relay some of them to me. And I want to see what you're thinking is the role of the manager. So Wendy, let me know once you start to hear some of those things. When I think about the role of the manager, I think about there's many roles, right? There are many hats that we wear as managers, and sometimes it's encourager, sometimes it's scheduler, and sometimes it might be handholder, sometimes it might be enabler, sometimes it might be those sorts of things. Are you starting to see a few
Yeah,
things
we've
coming
got
up,
a
Wendy?
lot of
Can you
great
just read a few
responses
of them
there.
off
Yeah,
here?
Tom is saying communication, Aaron, leader, we have staff support, we have Aaron as a trainer, we've got Caitlin saying feedback and support, Alyssa, a coach, role model from Garrick. We've got lots of great things coming in.
Awesome. So do you see the word gardener popping up anywhere?
No, not yet.
Oh, interesting. Nobody has said gardener as a manager. That's really interesting. Actually,
Guiding, overseeing, in the realm of, but no,
well,
no
honestly,
gardeners.
I didn't really think anyone was going to write gardener, but actually, I want to use that metaphor today and encourage you to think about the role of a manager or a leader as gardener. And I'll share why. A few years ago, I was at a family holiday party, and my brother-in-law was wearing a t-shirt. It was a green t-shirt with some very homemade looking font on it. And the word said, "Never blame the lettuce," across his chest. And I thought that was a really weird t-shirt, to tell you the truth. But I didn't say anything. I was, well, my brother-in-law, interesting guy. And I don't know. And at one point he looks at me and he says, "Eric, aren't you going to ask me about my t-shirt?" And I said, "Sure. Tell me about your t-shirt, Seth." And Seth said, he paused and he kind of looked at me and he said, "Actually, just Google it." So you can Google it right now if you want to, but I'll tell you what I found. I think you'll find the same thing. "Never blame the lettuce" is a quote. It's the beginning of a quote from a very well-known writer, thinker, philosopher, peace activist named Thich Nhat Hanh. I don't know if I pronounced his name exactly right. And he's written many books. And in one of the books, in one of his writings, he says the following: "When we plant lettuce in a garden, and if that lettuce fails to thrive, we never blame the lettuce. Instead, we look at the conditions in which the lettuce is growing and we ask ourselves, does it need more sunlight or more water or perhaps some fertilizer or less water and less sunlight? What are the conditions of the garden?" But we never blame the lettuce. And yet, when our friends or family, or I would say colleagues, team members fail to thrive, we often seek to blame them. rather than seeking to understand. Because when we understand, we can change the conditions and people can thrive. Here, I'm paraphrasing a bit at the end. And I think a manager's first role, first job is to understand that they are responsible for the conditions in which their team members operate. And instead of saying to yourself as a manager or leader, I wonder why that person didn't perform as expected, what's wrong with them, or why, asking questions about the team member, we should first and foremost ask the question, what are the conditions that have led to this behavior? Oh, they didn't meet expectations. I wonder if there was some lack of clarity about expectations. I wonder if there wasn't the right amount of tools provided or support or collaboration. I wonder what are the conditions that have led to the behavior rather than who's at fault, who's wrong, who needs to be performance managed into a better space. The role of the manager is to think of themselves as a gardener who's trying to create the conditions in which people can thrive. My brother-in-law was recently in Winnipeg, where I live, at my house. This is now years after I first saw his t-shirt. And there he was wearing his t-shirt again. I said, Seth, I really like your t-shirt. He says, I know. My colleague Wendy and I, together with a couple of other colleagues, or another colleague, Randy Greaser, wrote a book that we called Don't Blame the Lettuce, which is about, it's a leadership development book. And we like it so much that we named a book based on this. So I want to ask you this. Are you thinking about the conditions in which people operate? This is the first question of the day. As you think about identifying your role as a team leader, objective one, and what's your role in creating a healthy culture? A culture is a garden, and it's a garden that needs to be tended. All gardens need to be tended. Things can creep in there that we don't want. Weeds can get in there. We can have not enough water. We can have not enough nutritious soil. What are the things that we can do to make our teams thrive and create an environment in which people can thrive? I'm going to give you 3 other questions around conditions that you can be thinking about. So very specifically, do people feel situated in their environment? And for me, being situated is, do they know what's expected? Do they know how the organization, you as the manager, others are going to measure whether they're doing a good job or not, or doing their job or not? Do they know what's valued? Like, how should I behave if I want to succeed here? What's okay and what's not okay? At meetings, do we raise our hands before we talk, or do we just jump in? What are the norms? What's expected here? Do I feel situated? One question. Question 2 for you is, do you feel, or do they feel supported? That means, as a leader, do I give them the tools and attention they need in order to thrive? And I'm going to talk about this a bit later with Wendy. Support isn't just about during the day that they're at work, but do they feel supported as a whole person? And I'll tell you a bit more about that later. And lastly, do people feel secure? Is it safe to be a team member? Is it safe to contribute? Is it safe to be who they are? Psychologically safe as well as physically safe. Both of those things are, of course, important. Do we feel situated, supported, and secure? Wendy, you and I did a podcast recently in which we talked a lot about psychological safety and mistakes, and we called it Mistakes Were Made, But Not By Me, I think was the name of our podcast in the end. And we talked a lot about the role of punishment or not punishment. I don't know if that pops into your head a bit, but when I think about security, I also think about how we treat mistakes.
Yeah, and we talked about mistakes as really thinking about them. You started, let me rewind just a little bit. You said you were going to pose questions in terms of the content we were going through here. And I think that in and of itself should be part of what we think about in management and supervision, that we're curious, that we're asking questions. And so when mistakes are made, there is an opportunity to respond rather than react. And so we should be asking questions to really unearth, this mistake was made, but what were the contributing factors, so that we can address those, not just punish or chastise or blame the individual who was, at the tail end, or the one where the mistake was actually manifested. So it's about questioning and looking and thinking of it as a learning opportunity.
Thank you. Yeah, it's exactly right. Do we want a posture of learning, or do we want a posture of being right? And I would submit that a posture of learning is about understanding environment. And going back to the never blame the lettuce, we look at the environment. When something happens where there's a mistake or an error or something didn't go as planned, part of our job as the manager is, instead of saying who's at fault, who's right or wrong, we say, what happened? What's the environment that led to this? And what do we now need to do to make things better in the future, to prevent that from happening again in the future? And that's a bit about security, that's about support, and it's also about making sure people are situated, all three of those things. Okay, so never blame the lettuce. Question, or the question that goes with it, are you thinking about the conditions in which people operate? Question 2 that I want to submit to you is, are you focused on purpose? And in particular here now, we're going to talk about organizational purpose, team purpose, and individual purpose. So we can think about purpose on 3 different levels. A manager needs to take an organization's purpose and intent and ask the question, what does my team contribute to the overall purpose and intent of the organization? And then help the individuals translate what they're doing into the team purpose. So what's the purpose of the individual's role? What's the purpose of the team? And how does that contribute to the overall organizational purpose? So those of you who are watching, I'd like you to now, if you're willing to, think about, what is the purpose of your organization? What are you there to do? And second, what is the purpose of your particular team? And if you can briefly drop that into the chat, go ahead, feel free to share with each other. The purpose of my organization is, and my team's purpose is. And as you do that, and those of you who aren't chatting, that's fine too, but ask yourself this: is it crystal clear in your mind what the organization's purpose is and what the purpose of your team is? And then your role and each role on the team that you lead or supervise. Is it really clear how people are connecting to the team and to the organization? A number of years ago, I started working for a small company, and I asked the entrepreneur who owned the company, we were having some sort of staff development day, a planning day, leadership day. And I asked her, what is the purpose of this company, or what's the mission of this company? And she looked at me and she kind of smiled awkwardly and she said, to make money. And I remember thinking, there's got to be more than that. And I actually said back to her, I think there must be more. It just kind of popped out of my mouth. And she looked a bit awkward. And then I just asked some questions like, well, but why are we making money? Like, what are people paying for? What's the value that we're creating? What impact are we having? Those sorts of questions. And then it actually became really easy to define purpose beyond making money. And now, of course, it's valid for an entrepreneur to want to make money. It's valid for an organization to meet its budgets, to bring in its grants, whatever it's nonprofit, for-profit, doesn't matter. That's all really valid, but it's just not very inspiring. How many of us get up in the morning and go, so excited to go to work to make money for the organization or make money for my boss? Instead, we want to contribute to something that has more meaning in it. Purpose is a great motivator. But if we're not really clear on purpose, it's hard to tie in that motivator into people's work. So here's questions for you to take away and think about more. What's your team's role in carrying out your organization's purpose? And if your organization's purpose isn't clearly defined, just ask some awkward questions of upper management or the leaders and say, could you help me understand? I just want to be really crystal clear. What's the purpose of our organization? And if they smile awkwardly and say it's to make money, then you can say, well, more than that, like what value are we creating? They should be able to articulate something. It's actually not that hard. And from there, you can go, okay, well, my role or my team's role is this. And then you should be asking, if I feel crystal clear about this, do my team members have the same level of clarity about purpose?
Yeah, Eric, can I jump in
Yeah,
here?
go for it. Yeah,
I think
please.
that's really important because when you're in a management or a supervision role, you often have a lot of clarity around your
Mhm.
objectives and your goals that you're responsible to meet because you've probably spent some time contributing to those objectives and goals. But just because we have that understanding and that knowledge base, we should not make the assumption that everybody on the team has that same
Right.
understanding as well. And in fact, just to communicate it once or intermittently is not enough. It needs to be something that is a resounding call
Right.
for the team.
It's something that we orient ourselves to on a daily basis, really.
Yes.
Like, and like you said, it's often easier for upper level leaders and managers to be clear about purpose because they're having those conversations all the time. Whereas I may not be thinking about the person who's doing the very tactical work on my team. I may not be thinking about talking about purpose with them because, well, we're talking about graphic design, or we're talking about
Yes.
nursing, or we're talking about whatever we're talking about, the practical things. But as you're saying, they need to know too.
And to use that example, you have the background to know how that project with the graphic design team fits into the purpose,
Right.
but do they?
Right.
That's the bigger question.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that. So Wendy and I have done a lot of research on what makes a great workplace, what makes a great workplace culture, what makes a great leader. And one of the things that we found through our research and our organization's research, not just the two of us, others contributing as well, is that 98% of people who like their workplace also believe their organization has a meaningful purpose. And we can't say that, meaningful purpose makes it so that people like their work. But we can say with some relative certainty that those two things are connected, that if there isn't a meaningful purpose, it's probably harder to like the workplace. And so for us, we need to be asking as managers, frontline managers or supervisors, what am I trying to do here? What am I trying to accomplish? And in service industries, it might be making a great hamburger that makes people feel, and great customer service and makes people feel happy. And in another industry, let's say you work for a massive corporation, your team's job may have nothing to do with the frontline people and no direct line to front that the client you're serving, but your clients might be internal and you might be doing something that's really helpful to somebody somewhere else. And you can make meaning out of that for yourself and your team members. We need something more than a paycheck to create meaning and motivation in our lives. Third question, are you connected to your values? This is really quite closely linked to purpose, but a little bit different too, because values tell us how to relate to each other. They essentially tell us how we should behave on a team. So this question is aimed at organizational values, but it's also connected to you as a person and how you connect to your organization's values. And it's how you connect to your team's values. And there can be values on a lot of levels. And often we make some assumptions that we all have the same values here, or we're operating on the same way. We're not very explicit about what it means to operate together based on a set of values. And if your organization has a long list of 8 or 10 values that look really nice on a plaque, you can know that your upper management or your board of directors did a great job and had a great retreat and made this great list of values. That's one thing, and those can be helpful. But I think what's more helpful is to choose 3 or 4 values that are very specific to your team or your smaller organization or somewhere that say, if you're going to succeed here in this group, in this team, or in our organization, this is what it looks like. It's not really about marketing and telling the world how great you are and that you respect everybody and that it's really more about what does it mean to operate right here. And one of our goals for this webinar is to help you think about selecting great team members. And Wendy and I believe really deeply that a huge part of that process in the interview process is selecting for values. And I know you're right in the middle of that right now, aren't you, Wendy? You're hiring.
Yeah, and we're really trying to put a focus on listening for values and asking questions that elicit values, not just saying, here are our values, do these align with your personal values?
And everybody would say, oh yeah, those are great. I want a job.
Yes, yes. So it's about asking questions and really listening for the responses and unpacking those responses to hear what their personal values are. So, one of the questions that we ask, so one of our values, let me backtrack a little bit. One of our values is togetherness. And so one of the interview questions that we asked was, can you tell us about a time that you went above and beyond for another coworker? And what did you do? Why did you choose to do that? And what was the impact? And they don't need to use the word togetherness, but that's what we're listening for, is that there's a sense of collaboration. So our questions in the interview process, we need to, first of all, be really clear what our values are, and then we need to be listening for them in terms of an alignment, our values and the personal alignments with the person we're interviewing. Another example is, someone says, volunteer experience. We ask, so tell us about your interest and your hobbies. Sometimes people think that's a benign question. Well, really, if someone says, I volunteer at the Humane Society, well, tell me why that's important to you to give your time there. And you start to figure out what are the values that motivate them
Right.
in their personal life, which is also who they bring to their work environment.
Right. Thank you for both those examples. The question you just mentioned again was the first time I've heard that question. I love it so much because it gets at a value that we espouse, which is working together, like seeing ourselves as part of a team, and we need to contribute toward other people's success on our teams here at Achieve. So
Yeah.
I love it. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and our values, Eric, as you know, and we talk about a lot, they're how we work together in our unique context. And so our values are not something you can give to another organization and say, this is going to make you successful. These are our values that allow us internally to work well together.
Precisely.
Yeah, and so one of our values is joy. Well, if you're a serious and a somber individual, there's no personal judgment around that, but that's probably not the best fit for our particular organization. And so it's not just about us discerning value alignment, but also for the person who's considering coming in. Is this the right place for them to land?
Am I going to feel like I resonate with these people and fit well here, and that what I bring in terms of my values connect? Like, that's important for people. Now, a lot of people just want a job at that phase, but some people will self-select out for sure. And others will see the questions or hear about the questions and be attracted to us.
Yes.
And so that is interesting. Wendy, do you care about skills in your interview questions? You're trying to get the right team person. So we've just talked about interviewing for values. Do you care about skills?
No, I shouldn't be facetious and say, no, we don't care about skills at all. Yes, absolutely we do. We actually want that to be the ground level entry. The skills are assumed. The certification, the education, the background that's actually needed and relevant to the role.
Yes.
That has to be strong, has to be absolutely in place. But then the next piece is the values alignment, the connection to our mission. So it's both and. We don't need to create a binary here. It's both.
It's both. We want both. And sometimes we talk about skills being a floor. In some roles, we need to know that minimally you can do the things we're asking you to do. Maybe you have a certification, but beyond that, we need to know that you're passionate about our purpose, you're connected to our values, because that's going to enable you to go to the next level with the skills that we're asking for as well.
Or the aptitude to learn the skills.
Or the aptitude to learn. Yeah, sometimes that's all we need is the
Yeah.
aptitude to learn the skills. Absolutely. So a couple more things that we want to get across, and then it's time for Q&A. So you can start thinking about the questions that you want to ask me or Wendy or both of us. Last one we want to talk about is creating alignment among your team and organization. And well, actually, two more things I want to talk about. That is creating alignment and also trust. So we've asked, do you know the values? The second thing we want to ask you to think about is, do you know the priorities? And just a quick story here. We do a quarterly check-in with every team member. And each quarter, we do things slightly different. So it's not exactly the same questions we're asking, but the intent is to make sure we're aligned. And so if you're creating alignment, one way to do that is to have regular communication. And I sat down with a key team member who is a leader, and I asked him, do you know what our organization's priorities are for this quarter? And he started talking, and he listed some fabulous priorities that were from about a year ago. And I had this sinking feeling in my stomach when I realized that I was not doing a good job as a leader or as a manager for this person because I had clearly not communicated clearly what the priorities are for right now. And so that was a real motivator for me to make sure I'm communicating, to write an email to all the team and say, here's what our priorities are for the quarter, to talk about those in our staff meetings, to make sure that we know and that we're communicating clearly. And Wendy, this goes back to what you were talking about earlier. Managers and other leaders often have conversations at the purpose level, the priority level, but sometimes that doesn't get translated into more the action level, the active work of many of the people on our teams. And so that's something that we need to be asking as members. Do I know as the manager what the current priorities are? And do my team members know them and understand how they communicate or how they can contribute? The last big question is about how do I build trust in my organization and understanding the number one way that you can build trust as a leader. If you can think about, if it helps you, a leader that you have trusted in the past, a great leader, somebody who you think of as a great leader for you, and ask yourself what it is that they did which helped you trust them. Feel free to chat about that if you want to chat about that. And as you think about that, I'm going to ask you a further question. Were they demonstrating care to you as a person? Did they think about you as a person beyond the human resource that walked in the door of the organization? Did they see you as a whole person? Again, in our research, we found this was the most correlated pieces of or questions. My direct supervisor cares about me as a person, and I trust my direct supervisor. They're so closely connected. People need to know they're cared about. So I want you to think again about that person that was a great leader and ask the question of yourself, if they demonstrated care to you, which I hope they did, how did they do that? What were some of the actions that they took to demonstrate care to you? As you think about that, feel free to chat some of the things that they did that demonstrated care. And I'm assuming there's lots of different ways that people demonstrated care to you. So let's hear lots of them. I want to put one word up on the screen too. Were they listening to you? Did you feel like they understood what you cared about, what you had to say? Did they listen to you as a person? Again, in our research, when we asked what made a great leader, people said that they were a listener. When we did one of these I forget what these are called, word art, word bubble things, the single most common term in the long form answer that we heard about what made a great leader was that they were a listener. And that somehow, and then the other thing that we saw was it was the listening or demonstrating care that created trust. All of those three things go together deeply. So listening, care is listening, and care is supporting the whole person, not just the human resource that walks in the door. Wendy, we have a colleague, Chris, that we do a podcast with. And I don't know if one of the things that strikes me about one of the things that Chris often says is, are we preparing people to go home at the end of the day better than they were when they walk in the door?
Yes. Yes, we often think about it the other way around. Are people coming to work ready to work?
Right.
And yet we don't control the outside environment, but we do control the garden, what we're nurturing, our workplace culture, so that we ideally can send people home where they have experienced support and care in their working environment.
Yeah.
So maybe they even leave work feeling a little bit better than when they came.
Maybe they've got some new skills for listening to their spouse or their friend or their kids. Maybe they feel a little more energized. It's okay if people feel tired at the end of the day. We're not saying we're going to send you home fully restored. You had a long nap, but rather that something about work creates wellness for you so that you can live your life as a whole person, well at work and well at home as much as possible. In summary, the 4 big things to be paying attention to be a great manager or a great supervisor are: never blame the lettuce. Instead, ask yourself, what are the conditions that are being created for my team and my team members? Am I contributing to conditions in which they can thrive as people? Do I understand the purpose and the values of my team and my organization? And do my team members understand them very clearly? Am I communicating regularly and helping people align to the priorities, the current priorities, not last year's priorities like I was doing, but the current priorities? We're communicating there. And am I demonstrating care for the whole person, not simply the human resource? Am I demonstrating care for the whole person? So now is the time for you to feel free to ask some questions of us. We're going to watch the chat. Wendy's going to see what pops up, and either she or I will do what we can with the questions that might be coming to us here. So with that, I don't know, Wendy, if you've seen anything pop up yet. There's just a short delay in our broadcast. So sometimes when I ask a question, it takes a few seconds until we see the chat pop up on our end.
Yeah, so here's a question from a little earlier on. It says, do you ever get any kind of pushback from leaders when you talk about value and mission and purpose, saying that's really, that's the soft stuff. We need to move our organizational goals forward.
Interesting. Yes and no. I mean, I think that sometimes there would be a certain subset of leaders who would say, "Oh, that's maybe not so important," or "I can't be bothered with that." But I think a lot of people have read something about that or understand that people want to be connected to something. But I don't know that a lot of organizations and leaders spend enough time there, and that sometimes is hard for leaders to hear. To say, it actually, the frontline staff need to be able to articulate this as well as you do.
Yeah, yes. And as you're talking about that, I think people recognize the importance, but they don't always know how to make that a reality in their organization. Have you seen the movie Apollo 13?
A long time
A
ago.
long time ago? Well, I revisited it and I would encourage, like, professional development, you want something fun to do, watch Apollo 13 in terms of the leadership lessons that are there.
Oh,
And I found out that part of their training program, one of the values they were listening for was optimism. And I went, oh, that's interesting. And the flight director said in their training program, if anyone demonstrated any kind of wavering from that particular value, or they, hesitated, they were removed from the team as a
interesting.
candidate. And you think about Apollo 13, how many days into their mission and their oxygen tank blows up?
Right.
What did they need? They needed that collective optimism that
We can figure this out.
we can figure it out. We can do this as a team. So for that team, that value was so important to them being
Right.
successful in meeting their literal mission as an organization. And I think that's a really powerful message, that think about what your values are, and they are instrumental in your organizational success.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. So let's see any other questions coming in that you'd like to pose to us here.
There are some other questions that are coming in, but as the moderator, I'm also mindful of time.
Sure.
We will take note of what the questions are there, and we will be able to follow up in terms of potentially some blogs. And in closing, I'm going to ask people to, if you're interested in more resources that are aligned with the philosophy that you've heard here around leadership development and workplace culture, please go check out our website. We've developed a wide variety of resources, our blogs, our podcasts, and free resources that are there for you to take a look at and to share with whoever you think might benefit from those.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, all of you who
Yeah.
participated today. It always feels like the time is short, and you can feel free to connect with me. I'm Eric Stutzman at achievecenter.com. You'll find me on LinkedIn, and feel free to reach out there. Wendy is also on LinkedIn. We're both quite
Love that.
active there. So if you have particular questions that you were hoping actually we would talk about today and we didn't have time to get to those, just plunk them into LinkedIn and reach out to us there, and we'll take time to respond to you. Also, like Wendy said, we do a monthly podcast where we love to think about current management, leadership, workplace culture issues. So we're going to take a look at some of the questions you sent and see if we can address some of those in our upcoming podcasts. And if you're interested in future webinars like this, you can sign up for our newsletter, and they are announced as they come up. Our next one, Wendy, could you talk about when our next one is?
Yes, absolutely. So CTRI is hosting a free webinar on December 10th, and this
Who's
is about
CTRI?
the Crisis and Trauma Resource Institute, our sister company. And it's on a two-eyed seeing approach to helping. And with that, in just sort of a short explanation, it's about a blended approach to helping between an Indigenous perspective and a Western perspective. So if you're interested in learning more about that, please check out the CTRI, Crisis and Trauma Resource Institute, our website, and register for that. And we will, if you sign up for our newsletter, we'll keep you posted in regards to our next free webinar for Achieve as well.
That should be announced in the next week or two, I believe, somewhere in that time frame, maybe 3. But it'll come out in our newsletter for sure.
And I'm looking at the list here, and Leslie had a great question around questions for like a check-in. And I'm thinking, we'll take a look again at the chat, and we'll make sure that we send out some resources in response to some of the questions that are there. Yeah. So ready to wrap it up?
I think it's time for us to wrap it up. Hey, Wendy, this has been great. Thank you to all of you again who attended this webinar today. And we want to wish you well on your management and supervision journey.
Yeah. Till next time, let's continue to build great workplaces together.
Bye-bye.
We'll see you all.